since I was just speaking a few minutes ago. I just thought it might be nice if people could just say who they are and which school that they're from. It's really useful for me because I get to see a lot of names. It's nice to be able to put a face to the name, and it's also nice to know which school that you are from, because obviously we are a growing trust, and there are a lot more names and faces. So yeah, is it all right if I start with you, Tina, just because you're at the top of my screen? Oh, sorry, Tina, you're on mute.
Because I don't usually use Teams, how do you make the main speaker the main screen? Is there a trick? Like on Zoom, you can have it so the main speaker.
Right. I'm not sure because
no.
I've just got a gallery of faces, but
okay.
So I'll share my screen shortly anyway, so you won't need to see me.
If you press the view grid button at the top, you should be able to choose speaker.
Okay, I'll have a look at that. Okay, thank you. So I'm Tina Tierney, and I've been a governor for about 3 years at Thresfield Primary School, who joined with you, I think, 18 months ago.
Lovely. Nice to meet you, Tina.
Thank you.
And then Carol is Carol White.
I'm Carol White.
Carols.
I'm Chair of Governors at Darley and Somerbridge, and we joined about 2 years ago.
Nice to meet you. See you, Carol.
Nice to see you.
And I've got Abby next.
Hi, I'm Abby Rhodes, Chair of Governors at Hawes Primary School. I've no idea how long we've been with YCAT, but Andrea will know.
Nearly forever.
She's on the call too.
Hi, Abby. And then Carol Robertson.
Hi, I'm Carol Robertson. I've been governor at Bradley's both primary school since I think it was 2021, and I think we joined YCAT in 2023, but I might be wrong with that.
That sounds about right. It's all become a bit of a blur, the dates that schools have joined. We don't need to introduce you, Joe. We all know who you are. I've got Catherine next.
Hi there, everyone. Catherine Dresser here. I'm a co-opted governor at Cononley Primary School, and we joined the trust in January this year.
Nice to meet you, Catherine. And then I've got Ian.
So I'm Ian Austin. I'm a governor alongside Tina at Thresfield Primary School.
Nice to meet you, Ian. And then Andrea. I know a lot of us know you, Andrea, but I know you. Joe knows you, but some of the others may not. So,
hello, I'm Andrea Cagle. I'm the head of school at Hawes.
And
no, I don't know when we joined YCAT.
Oh, back in nearly at the beginning.
Yes,
when time began, I think.
Yeah. And then we've got Matt.
Yep, I'm Matt Byrne. I'm parent governor for about 6 months at Bilton Grange Primary.
Nice to meet you, Matt. And then Becky. Hi, Becky.
Hi, I'm Chair of Governors at Bradley School.
Nice to speak to you again, Becky. And Rachel. I know we know you, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Sorry, I can't get my camera to work tonight. So, but I've been at Bilton Grange. I'm a governor for 6 years now. Nice to see you all.
Oh, nice to see you too, Rachel. And then finally, we've got Paul.
Yeah, hi all. Paul Naisbitt, parent governor at Bradley. I've been in governor part just approaching 2 years.
Well, nice to see you too again, Paul. Okay, so I'll just get straight into it. I'm going to share my screen. I've just put together a little presentation. I hope everybody can see that. So I shall begin, she says. Oh, there we go. So my agenda for this evening is just to go through academy finance, because we are different to private industry in terms of how we're financed and how we manage our finances. And so I just wanted to give you an overview of the background to Academy Finance, how we structure it, how we manage it in YCAT, the finance systems that we use, and just all the, all the different aspects to it. So I'm not going to dwell for a long time on each particular area, but please feel free to ask any questions as we go along. So in terms of the background of Academy Finance, academies, we're free state funded schools, and we're run, but we are a charitable trust. We cannot run for profit. So, but we have to balance our books. So, we have our mechanism for funding, and then we have to create a budget and ensure that we are spending our funds in line with the rules and regulations which we're governed by. But we are not allowed, we can make a surplus, but we have to, that surplus is reinvested back into at school level. We have a greater freedom than maintained schools in how we actually run our schools. If we so choose, we do, in some aspects, we do run our Academy Trust along the same lines as many of the maintained schools anyways, but there are certain areas where we have more freedom. We are very much more accountable than local authority schools. We have a full external audit every year. We also have to have internal scrutiny. So we have 2 internal scrutiny audits every year. But as I said, every year in fact, we're just coming to the end of our external audit for this year. The auditors check through all of our systems, ensure that we're, following all the guidelines, and then they put together our accounts for us, which we then submit. We have to submit by the end of the calendar year. There's so many years in finance, I get confused sometimes. So in terms of the YCAT finance structure, that is also at YCAT Central. So there's myself, the CFO. I'm the one that I oversee all the financial procedures. I manage the budgets for all of the schools, meet with the head teachers, sometimes meet with governors as well, and we discuss all things finance. So below me we have finance manager Suzanne. She's in charge of the financial management and the operational support of the trust, and she oversees the day-to-day running of the finance team. And below Suzanne we have two further members of staff. We have Barbara and Vivian, and Vivian inputs basically all the financial data, paying all of the invoices on behalf of all of the schools for everything that the schools have ordered. And then we have Barbara, who does all of the daily financial procedures. There's things like the bank reconciliation and recording all of the other financial transactions. And then all that information is fed into us by the schools. So ordering of goods and services is done at school level. That feeds into our finance system, and that information we then centrally pay all the bills. We do the wages. So everything is done through the central team. I don't know if anybody has any questions around that. If not, I shall move on. So what systems do we use? So we have our main finance system is Xero. I'm sure most of you will have heard of Xero. We have a version of Xero which has been adapted to meet the requirements for education, because obviously, with a system where we have to be audited, we have to have very clear and transparent systems in place. So that's what our finance package does. Sitting alongside of that, we have a budget management system. The one that we currently use, but are in the we're currently moving to a new one. Sorry, I completely forgot the word I needed then. We use something called BPS, which is budget planning software, and we use that as our budget management system for we keep all our staffing costs on there, so that we can monitor our salaries and costs, and then we produce our actual budgets from that system. Now, when we are in the process of moving over to a new system called IMP, which is a more sophisticated budgeting system, it has been specifically designed to support multi-academy trusts. It's the only software package out there that is just designed specifically for trusts. So I am in the process at the moment of being trained on that system, and we're sort of halfway through. So going forward, when it comes to producing reports, the reports that will be produced will look very different to the reports that you currently receive. But I can't show you anything with that at the moment because I haven't actually got that far with it yet. So that's our finance systems. So then actually moving on to what does academy finance actually look like? How are we funded, and what are the processes that we go through? So our main income is something called the General Annual Grant, and we are funded directly by the DFE. And although that funding that we receive is based on each Academy Trust's formula is based on the local authority for that area, the values that have been set by that local authority. Now, all that means is there is it's not that we get the amount of funding that we're getting is any different. It's just that there's maybe certain aspects of funding that maybe have a slightly different formula applied to it, and that just means that some funding may be fully delegated to the trust, and some of it may be retained by the local authority. The main driver for how our funding is calculated is pupil numbers. Now, we every year in October there is a census that is taken, and the pupil head count from that day will determine the amount of funding that the trust will, or each school will, receive the following October. So it's actually 11 months in arrears in terms of that pupil data, but that is fixed. So once that census is done, that is the pupil numbers that you will be funded on. Now that is the driver for the majority of the income for the trust. So there isn't a huge amount of leeway in terms of raising additional funding. So but at this point of the census being done, we don't know what the level of funding will be, and by that I mean is how much the government will actually fund us. You know, we get an amount per pupil, but in the October we don't know what level that will be. We know what it has been, but we don't know what it will be going forward. So in terms of the general annual grant, we receive that in equal 12 monthly payments. The beginning of every month we get a payment into our bank account for each school for their 12th of that payment. So in terms of the understanding what our finance levels will be for the following year, that information is usually available by the end of February next year. So when I'm doing revised budgets now, which I'm in the process of doing, I can update that information with actual pupil numbers, but what I can't do is categorically say what level of funding it will be for the following financial year. I will make an assumption, and I will share with everybody what that assumption will be, based on information that I've had, you know, from other colleagues, and you know, sometimes it gives an indication of what what that could possibly be. Sorry, Joe, you've got a question.
Yeah, no, it's good. Thanks, Sarah. We've just had a question popped up from Matt, and he's just asking, are pupil needs funded extra, for example, SEND pupils, and is that measured on census day?
In short answer to that is no. So SEN funding, in fact, if I move on to my next slide, oh no, it's my slide after that, because SEN funding is at the moment is, you know, it's a tricky area because we are very underfunded. Not just our trust, as a country, we are very underfunded in terms of SEN funding. So we have what is deemed to be a notional amount of funding in our budget for SEN, but if we have children with particular needs, with a higher level of need, then it may be that the schools have applied for an educational health care plan, which will attract additional funding, but it doesn't cover the full cost of that support. So it is deemed that schools already have a certain level of funding in their budget for SEN funding, but it isn't funding that we set aside specifically for SEN funding. We have to take it from the resources that we already have in there. So it really is a very tricky area, because we're seeing more and more SEN needs within the schools, and it's very tricky as to how we actually manage that. Yes,
so
and
can I just add to that, Sarah?
Yeah.
Well, so it's part of that formula, Matt. So the notional funding that Sarah's describing is part of the local authority formula. So each school is allocated through that formula notional funding, but it isn't based on the number of pupils that you have with special needs. It's based on that local authority and that local picture, as it were, as part of that local funding formula that's been put together with the DFE. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was only asking because I've seen different. I think there was some data shared a while ago. I can't remember if it was one of these ones, but different schools have different levels or percentages of pupils with different needs, and it was just whether or not that's taken into account anywhere. Doesn't sound like it.
It isn't. Yeah. No, it isn't. But I will, on my next slide, I will pick up again a little bit more on the SEN. So in terms of other funding that we receive, so as I said, the majority of our funding comes through via pupil numbers, and we do receive other DFE funding. There is pupil premium funding, which is based on number of free school meals. Again, this information is taken from the census and any children who are looked after from care. So that is additional funding that the school receives. We receive funding for universal infant free school meals. So that is all of our pupils in Key Stage 1, as long as they take a meal on census day, and we receive £2.58 per meal. Again, this is a national amount. It doesn't actually cover the cost of the meal. And so we do encourage all of our schools to, you know, to get as many children as we can to take a meal on that day. But again, school meals is another one that can be a little bit tricky in terms of, because we tend to find with this, especially with the smaller schools, it is harder to actually cover your costs with the income that that comes in. Other DFE funding, we have the sports premium. I'm sure you've all heard of the PE sports grant. That is, we have had confirmation that is to continue this year, next year. Beyond that, we don't know, but we've been in this situation for a lot of years. We get a lump sum of, irrespective of the size of the school, a lump sum of £16,000 and then £10 per pupil on top of that. In recent years, we have had a lot of additional grants to cover different areas of funding. We've had, I'm sure you will have seen in the news about pay increases. Couple of years, 2 or 3 years back, we were tending to receive pay rises of between 1% and 2%, which was all managed and funded within the funding that we already have. We've seen considerable increases in pay rises, those pay rises are always announced after we've had our funding. So there's only a certain amount of increase built into our budget funding that will cover pay rises. So to allow for that, the DFE have awarded additional grants, which is formula based. It's not based on what the actual additional cost is for each school. I won't go through all the different grants because we've had so many, but the most recent ones that we have paid additionally into our budgets are the SBCG, which is in fact, that shouldn't be a C, that should be an S. It's a school budget share grant, and that was to cover the additional increase in the teachers' pay rise and the non-teaching staff pay rise from last September and April, because pay rises are awarded at different times of year for different staffing categories. And then the national insurance grant. So from last April, we saw the increase in national insurance contributions. Again, we didn't have the funding in our budget, so we were awarded additional grant. Now, what we're finding with all of these additional grants is they're paid separately for a year, and then they're rolled into the national funding formula. So then they will form part of the GAG funding. And hopefully then we will have a reduced number of grants, because they're all paid at different times and to cover different period of time, and it makes accounting for them tricky, I should say. So other areas where so non-DFE funding, we receive funding for early years, and that comes directly from the local authority. And again, that's information that the schools, through a census, but this is an early years census, they provide information to the local authority for, and this isn't based on number of pupils, it's based on number of hours that have been claimed, that the parents are putting their children in nursery for. So we receive an amount per hour for early years funding. And then the other area where we're funded by the local authority is the SEN funding. And this is where we get funding for specific, what is called educational healthcare plans. And these are once they've been applied for and been approved through the school system. And we only receive that funding once the healthcare plan has been approved. It's never backdated. So even if a school has been supporting a particular child with extra needs, for maybe 6 months, they're not going to get any funding to cover that interim period. So, and as I said, the SEN funding that we receive is a top up. It's deemed that we have a certain percentage of funding in our budget already. So we're only getting the top up cost to cover additional costs in terms of staffing. And, we have to meet the needs of that actual statement. So other areas that we can get funding are through donations, through school lettings. I'm just trying to think of other things which I've just clubs, before and after school clubs, additional nursery sessions, if we have any after school clubs, sports clubs, etc. Those are all ways that we can make some more income. Not huge amounts of income, and often some of that income is offset by costs as well. So that is mainly our revenue funding. We do get capital funding, We have something called devolved formula capital. This isn't a huge amount of funding, and what we do in YCAT, again, each trust can determine how they will actually manage their capital funding. We pool it as a trust. We get £4,000 per school plus an amount of £11.25 per pupil. It isn't a lot. It isn't going to make any significant impact in terms of, you know, building structures or whatever in school. Each schools can make a bid if they have a small capital project within their school that the costs fall outside of what they can afford from their revenue budget. A lot of that funding we pool to support some SIF projects. Now, SIF projects are conditioned improvement funds, and this is where we can make significant bids to government funding to support major building works within the school. So thinking to what we've had done in some of our schools, I'll look to you, Hawes, because you're here, Andrea. You've had a new roof, safeguarding works, new fencing around the schools. I know that Bilton Grange, you've had the same. So we've had new windows, new boilers, and, you know, quite considerable capital works that have been done. We have to make an application for these bids, and there is no guarantee that we will be successful. But when we do make a bid, then we have to, this is where we use our devolved formula capital, because we have to put so much into each capital bid. It's done on a point system. The more points we put in, the more likely we are to actually receive that that funding. So, but all schools have benefited from the devolved formula capital. Some benefit more from others in different years. That's, you know, that's it. But all of our schools have received SIF bids, apart from our newest schools, because last year was the first year that we weren't successful in any of our bids. But we are in the process of writing new bids now. They have to be submitted by, I can't remember a date in December, but you know, most of the head teachers will be aware of you know, anything that is particularly pressing, you know, new windows. We've got you know, maybe got a leaky roof, and we use an engineering company who do our project managers for us, and they write the bids. They're experienced in writing these bids. They know what to say, what to put in there, and hopefully we will put in as many bids as we can. We don't find out the results until May. So there is quite a period of time before we actually find out that information. But yeah, that is probably all the information about capital funding, unless anybody has any questions. Okay, I shall move on. So in terms then of our central team, so I've explained to you how our schools are funded, but we as a central team, obviously we need to operate to be able to provide the services that we do to all of the schools. So but we don't have any pupils to fund us, so we get our funding through an agreed top slice. And at the moment, our top slice calculation is based on 5.5%, and that 5.5% is of the GAG funding and any of the DFE specific grants. So it's at the moment it's the school budget share grant and the national insurance grant. So, and it's also nursery funding as well. So we as a central team take 5.5% from all of the schools' budgets. And that helps support the services that we provide then in turn back to the schools. We also receive other income. So Jo does a lot of work, she through supporting other schools. outside of the trust. She can do some work for them, and that can generate some income. We also have our Teaching Alliance, and again, this is where Jo does a lot of work in putting courses together. I'm sure some of you have been on some of the courses, and any schools that are outside of our trust, they pay for those courses. And then the last bit of income we get is through investment, just investing our reserves through the bank, and that generates some additional income for us as well. So that's the funding of the central team. So in terms of academy expenditure then, so I've talked about income and where we get our income from, but it's then how do we spend it? So our biggest outlay is staffing costs. It's usually anywhere between 70 and 80% of our budget is spent on staffing costs. So when we talk about having to make savings, there isn't a huge amount of scope for cutting back on other areas. And often if we do have to make some significant changes, it usually is through staffing. So this is why it's very important that we ensure that the staffing information that we have is correct, that we have all the pay, the correct pay rises applied, and that if we're making assumptions for future years, because that will inform what we think our budget is going to look like in future years. Because if we are say potentially faced with a deficit budget for the following financial year, it's now that we need to look at what are we going to do to make those savings. So it is important that we have our staffing correct now and what we think it's going to be in the future. Other costs which can be quite significant are some of our premises costs. I mean, we've had quite a lot of in the news in the last few years around our energy costs. Energy costs have come down, and we are in contracts with through the local authority to try and ensure that we are getting best value, for our contracts. So there are certain mechanisms that we have in place to try and ensure that we are getting best value and that we're not spending sort of over and above what we should be. There is benchmarking information which is available through government websites, which we can benchmark ourselves against other schools. It is quite tricky with our trust because we are quite unique in our setup. So it's finding, when we are benchmarking, finding other trusts that are, in a similar setup to us. But we carry out these exercises every year to try and, to ensure on a school by basis and as an overall trust to see that we are getting the best value for money and that we are spending our funds as we should. So that's academy expenditure. So in terms of the budget setting and budget management, I have touched on briefly about how, sort of what the mechanism is. So every year we have, sorry, I just need to shut my door. Every year we have to set a balanced budget. We're not allowed to set a deficit budget. So we produce a 3-year forecast. Our financial year runs from September to August, and the current year, the new year's budget has to be a balanced budget. Now, through the forecasting, that can give us an indication based on staffing that we know and what we think our pupil numbers are going to be, what our budget is going to look like in 2 or 3 years' time. That can inform some decisions that we may possibly have to make to look to see if we have to make any savings. Now, obviously, because we've just had the October census, we now know that those pupil numbers will inform our funding for September 26. So if a school gets an influx of numbers between now and next September, it would be another year before they would benefit from that increase in pupil numbers. So it's just about, trying to be very transparent in the terms of the budget process that I go through. I have a timetable for when I will. There is another slide which goes through that of how the budget process plays out through the year, the information that I provide, how I will provide it, the meetings that I will have with head teachers and sometimes with governors themselves, and just ensuring that that we have a robust system in place that allows time for planning and for questions, and ensuring that that we can deliver obviously the education that we need to the children within the resources that we have. So this is the timeline that, sorry, I was just referred to in terms of our budget cycle. I'll just go through this very quickly. So September, that's the start of our financial and academic year. In October, we have the school census, which informs our funding. Then between October and December, we go through our external audit. Our annual accounts are produced, and our audited accounts have to be submitted to the DFE by the end of December. In January, there is another census. There is a census that is done 3 times a year. This one doesn't inform our pupil funding. It does. It informs some of the other funding, but it isn't fundamental to the actual pupil funding, which is our GAG funding. In February, our GAG funding statements are published, which again can then inform. It can mean I can update the forecast to give schools a clearer idea of what their actual funding is going to be the following year. We have in March, this replaces what used to be called the school's financial values standard. It's just a way of ensuring that we are meeting all of our financial requirements, and the trust are satisfied that we are meeting all of our financial requirements. So in April, May time, I will start doing the initial budget works for the budget for the new financial year. There's a lot happens, and a lot of this, I'm sorry, is a little bit backwards and forwards. By May, we have to submit our accounts to Companies House, and then in June, we have the final budget approval for the new financial year. So that's when those budgets will come to you in your governor meetings during the summer term. There is a budget forecast return, which I have to do in July, and then August is our financial year end. And then we start the whole process again the following year. So financial reporting requirements. Now, this is a requirement which is laid out in the Financial Academy's handbook, which you may or may not be aware of, but these are, if you like, that's our policy, that's our regulations that we have to adhere to. So monthly, I produce management accounts for each school. That shows income and expenditure against budget with variances. I also produce a balance sheet and cash flow that goes to trustee level, not to governor level. And that gives you those management accounts give you a projected outturn for your current financial year. It is just a 1 year. It is a 1 year budget essentially. So as changes happen throughout the year, which they inevitably do, changes happen in staffing, these reports will highlight any of those variances. And then termly, I do an updated budget forecast. I update it with actual information, any actual information I know, but I will make assumptions going forward, predicting what our income and expenditure are going to be, but obviously explaining any of those changes. Again, I will meet with head teachers and governors accordingly to to discuss any of that information. The updated budgets will be coming out to schools in the next week. So that is the first budget update for the current financial year. So I just wanted to put this in just to give you a quick overview of some of the pressures that we face. It has actually become a more difficult process in terms of budgeting. You know, once we know what our funding is, once we know what our pay rises are, we can apply that. But looking forward, it is very difficult because all the information comes out at different times, and we have deadlines in which we have to meet. 9 times out of 10, pay rises aren't agreed until after those deadlines, you know, have come and gone. So but the biggest impact on our funding and our decision making is based on pupil numbers, and nationally we are seeing a decline in a fall in pupil numbers. So obviously that impacts our funding, and it will impact what our budgets look like going forward. So it is really important that we can be as accurate as we can in knowing what our pupil numbers are. The other difficulty we have is around government funding. We saw a change, obviously we saw a change in government last year, and there was a period of time when we heard nothing. We had no idea. We didn't know what pay rises were going to be. We didn't know what funding levels were going to be. We still had our deadlines to meet. So it was very difficult to predict what the future was going to look like. But we had to do something, and we have to do that by making assumptions. And then again, I touched on this earlier, is on the SEND demand. Higher costs, funding often falls short, and sometimes schools have to make some very hard decisions around supporting children with special educational needs. As I said earlier, the biggest cost to the school is the staffing cost, and without understanding what pay awards pension is going to be, recruitment is always a challenge, especially in some of our rural schools. All of these factors add pressure on how we manage our budgets. So again, in terms of pay awards, pensions, etc., you know, try to be as informed as I can be, but there are times when I do have to make assumptions, and those assumptions don't always come to fruition. It could be something higher, it could be something low, we just don't know. So, but again, I will always be very transparent in the assumptions that I make. And then there's always the uncertainty around inflation and policy changes. And again, I keep using the word, I just have to make assumptions. There are certain institutions out there that provide, you know, as much up-to-date information as they can, and I am part of a finance network group, and you know, and we all talk and we share information. So you know, I'm not just making wild assumptions myself. I am getting that, you know, informed information from other people. So yeah, those are our long-term pressures. So this is the final slide that I put in, and this is more directed at you guys as governors, and it's just a little bit of a checklist for, you know, for things that you as a governor could possibly be looking at, you know, in your role if you are part of your finance committee. So there's reviewing your monthly management accounts. The management accounts do go to schools. If you are chair of finance, part of the finance committee, and want those monthly management accounts, I can include you in that. They're all held on SharePoint, so I can give you access to that information. I just need to know. But at the moment, they all go to the head teacher, and I sort of trust that the head teacher will pass that information on accordingly. So when you get those management accounts, it's just looking at any variances, what they are against the budget, you know, familiarising yourself with them and understanding that you know what they are, and you know, and asking questions. Your biggest cost is your staffing cost, looking at your staffing, looking at it against the budget. Is it different? If it is different, why is it different? You know, and it could be a perfectly valid reason why it is different. So, you know, it is just understanding that. Benchmarking your costs against possibly other schools in the trust or other schools in the country, on the I think it's called View My Financial Insights, which is available on the government website, and anybody can access that. So, but again, I do produce slightly more detailed information, and that goes, I share that again with the head teacher, but that is information that is worth looking at. And then looking at your reserves, so looking at what level of reserves that the school is holding. We do have a reserves policy as a trust, but at governing body level, that you want to ensure that you are maintaining a certain level of reserves for that year where maybe your pupil numbers have fallen and you do need to support your budget. You may know that you're just going to have one tricky year. You don't want to have reserves that are too high, but also you don't want to have reserves that are too low. So again, as part of my process of meeting with the head teachers, you know, reserves is something that we certainly look at, and it could even be that we have to make some appropriate savings to ensure that we are maintaining a certain level of reserves. And the final thing is, and I'm sure that you will have heard this before as your role of governor, is to challenge. You know, if you're unsure of anything, you want to know what that's about, you know, ask the question, why have you made that assumption? You know, is it a valid assumption? You know, explain it to me. What are the risks in our pupil numbers, funding changes, inflation, etc.? You know, just ask those questions. Either ask them through, you know, through the governing body, questions that can come back to me, or, you know, again, it's something that I can actually have, you know, that meeting with yourself or with the head teacher as appropriate. And that was a whistle stop.
I'm not sure whether it's me that's frozen or Sarah that's frozen.
Sarah.
Is it?
I think it's Sarah, yeah.
Good timing for
Is
a
it Sarah?
freezing.
Let's stop. I'm just going to stop the recording and then we can take any questions.